remember a few years ago, there was this young kid who became a viral sensation because he was crossing everyone over and hitting tough shots. That kid is Julian Newman, who was a household name among internet basketball fans more than a decade ago before he disappeared into obscurity. And he's the perfect example of the fact that it takes more than just millions of views online to become a basketball superstar. Julian Newman was a prodigy as a child. Basketball was one of the first things he learned. He probably learned how to play the game before he could even walk. Of course, it was all because of his father, who went on to work as a basketball coach. Newman trained under his father's guidance, going through rigorous training sessions where he had to make 100 free throws, 200 floaters, and 200 jump shots each day at practice. When he got so good that all the kids his age were no match for him, Newman had to play with bigger and older players in recreational leagues. And to make sure he was going to develop fast, his dad made him train on a regulation-sized basketball early in his life. These types of stories seem to be the starting points of some of the best basketball superstars in the world. If a player starts early, develops early, and shows dedication and obsession to the game of basketball at an early age, he's bound to reach the NBA one day. And we've seen that time and time again from many of the game's greatest superstars. True enough, Julian Newman and his family thought he was going to be something special. He had everything when he was a kid because he could handle the ball, shoot well, and do things that some of the other kids his age couldn't do. From a skill standpoint, he was built to become a star. So when he started playing at a high level in middle school, he was unstoppable. There was no one who could keep up with Newman's combination of skill, speed, and shiftiness from the point guard spot. He could cross his defenders over, use fancy dribble moves to get them off balance, and then create enough space in the perimeter or close to the basket for a high percentage shot. As a fifth grader for Downey Middle School, he scored as many as 91 points in a single game, putting Kobe Bryant's 81-point performance in the NBA to shame. When his father, a coach for the school, realized his son was far too advanced for the competition, he inserted him into the varsity team in a hurry. And the kid actually averaged double digits in assists and was a capable defender because he was talented at getting steals. He led all middle school students in Florida in assists. But the big problem that eventually plagued him his entire career was already obvious when he was a fifth grader. Julian Newman was small. We're not talking about a guy who's set to grow to around 6 feet tall, which is already small in NBA standards. Instead, at 11 years old, he was 4 feet 5 inches. Well, there were probably a few NBA players who were short as fifth graders before they went through growth spurts, but a 4'5" player is really short in any standard. That's why there were people who were wondering whether or not Newman was going to grow tall enough to actually turn heads his way. Despite that, he averaged 17 points as a sixth grader. That was when he started becoming a viral sensation, with his videos and highlight reels making rounds on YouTube. He became an overnight sensation because his highlights and moves were far too advanced for someone his age. Newman could dribble the ball like a Harlem Globetrotter, and he was doing it against bigger players. As early as that age, he was already thinking about college basketball, even thinking he had what it took to play for the legendary John Calipari, who was still the head coach of the Kentucky Wildcats back then. Those were some big dreams for a small kid, and they were nothing but dreams. Despite his lofty goals, he was focused on taking things one game at a time, even though he was already making appearances on national television. Newman became a guest on Steve Harvey, The Ellen DeGeneres Show, and Good Morning America. He even stepped on an NBA floor where he got invited to a halftime show in an Orlando Magic game. At that point, people were thinking that this small kid was going to soon be regularly playing on NBA courts. Meanwhile, his star continued to soar. Newman was called the greatest sixth grader in the country after averaging 13.6 points and 10.5 assists. Meanwhile, he finished the 7th grade, putting up 19.8 points and 10.2 assists. Before finishing his middle school years, he scored 52 points in one game and even went up against one of the top recruits for the 2020 class, earning 13 million views on YouTube. He even started a reality show about his development as a basketball sensation. But while he was putting up good stats and garnering millions of views as a viral sensation, Julian Newman's life was a bit too publicized. A lot of critics said his parents and the media were putting too much on his shoulders by marketing him as a child star. And the criticisms made sense, because it looked like Newman and his family were more concerned with views instead of letting the young boy develop properly while living a normal childhood. But it didn't matter because he was putting up good numbers while putting on impressive performances. He finished his middle school years averaging 23.9 points and 11.4 assists. By his sophomore season, Julian Newman was already a true Florida prep legend after recording 3,873 total points as a varsity player. He had already surpassed the varsity record that stood since 1998, but while he was playing high school basketball, Newman's name was steadily dying down, even when he was putting up impressive numbers. The honeymoon was over, and it was clear that the hype was almost as good as dead. While his peers were getting ranked by some of the biggest scouts and were getting offers from big colleges, Newman wasn't getting any. It may have been true that he was making a ton of money off YouTube and social media while some of the other young prospects were focused on basketball, but none of the people who were actually knowledgeable about the sport were interested in him. So, from being the biggest middle school basketball player of all time, Julian Newman, it turned out, wasn't actually good enough to grab the attention of scouts and coaches. But why is that? Well, the first thing that pops out is his height. Newman peaked at 5'7", and he claims that he's just 5'6" on his best day. Yes, that happens when you're just 4'5" at 11 years old. He was never going to be a 6-footer, and we know that height is the first thing that people look at when it comes to basketball. But before you start talking about guys like Spud Webb, Muggsy Bogues, Earl Boykins, Nate Robinson, and Isaiah Thomas, you might want to chill. Yes, there have been very short guys who had good NBA careers. Bogues, at just 5'3", averaged 7.7 points, 7.6 assists, and 1.5 steals his entire 14-year career. A guy who's barely tall enough to ride a roller coaster lasted more than a decade in the NBA, and there was good reason.
11 points for Sickman. It's 59-52 at the buzzer. It's good!
Bogues was simply a fit for the NBA because, despite his height, he could pass the ball, finish against bigger players, and compete on the defensive end. He played the game the right way, even if he was too short. On the other hand, Newman was more about the stats and the views. He averaged 34.7 points and 7 assists in 2019, but they were empty stats. Newman was playing to impress fans instead of coaches and scouts. He focused more on fancy dribbles that were empty moves instead of playing the right way. At times, he refused to pass the ball to his teammates until the final second. He held onto the ball 99% of the time, alienating teammates and playing a selfish brand of basketball. Even if he were 6 feet tall, he was never going to make it to the NBA with that kind of mindset. His style, true enough, is impressive when you look only at the artistic side of the game. He can dribble impressively and hit shots over taller defenders, but he had a me-first mindset that is never good in an organized 5-on-5 setup. He might be better off for street ball or 3-on-3 games. But at a higher level, his style was never going to work. No Division I school ever gave him a shot, even though his father said he received at least 15 offers. But no one could ever show proof that he did indeed receive D1 offers. He didn't even get Division II scholarships. In what seemed like a last-ditch effort, Julian Newman left Downey Christian High School to go to Prodigy Prep, a high school his father started. Of course, he was going to be the star of that school's varsity team, and by playing as the star of a team his father coached and a school his family started, the spotlight was on him. Sadly, colleges weren't interested in him at all. And his family even tried to pump the hype up, posting a picture of him choosing where his next destination was. They even had the audacity to put the NBA in his choices, even though he wasn't even a quarter as good as he believed. Newman graduated high school with no offers from big schools. There weren't even any semi-pro teams or overseas leagues willing to sign him because the truth was, he was just not that good. Newman still claims he was in talks with overseas teams, such as the ones in Australia, but with no one to show proof that the NBL was interested in him, those were just empty words coming from an empty basketball player. Not willing to give up on his basketball career, Julian Newman went to college in 2024 after signing with Bethesda University of the National Christian College Athletic Association. But he really wasn't good enough after shooting 0 out of 6 from the field in his debut game. His team suffered a 109-23 loss. At that point, it was clear that maybe there was no way Newman was ever going to live up to the middle school hype he had more than a decade ago. In that regard, Julian Newman is the perfect example of someone who counted his eggs before they hatched. He and his family rode the hype train and tried to focus more on turning him into an internet sensation instead of letting him develop the right way. The success got to his head and made him believe he was a true star just because he had millions of views.